The gods watched from above, but this story was never theirs. Before spring ever touched the earth, before flowers dared to bloom, there was silence, ancient, endless, and waiting. And in that silence, a single name trembled through the dark: Persephone. She was not yet a goddess, not yet the queen the poets would one day mourn. Only a girl walking through a field that did not know her fate. The sky hung heavy with whispers, and deep beneath her feet the Lord of Shadows stirred, for even death itself had begun to dream. What followed was not a tale of abduction or despair, as mortals would one day claim, but a story of love so powerful it broke the laws of heaven, binding light to shadow, spring to sorrow, and life to the quiet breath of death. Listen closely, for this is not a story of how the world ends, but how it learns to bloom again. They say every spring is born from a secret, a breath the world forgets to exhale. And on the edge of that forgotten breath she walked, Persephone, the girl who carried sunlight in her eyes and silence in her heart. The fields bowed beneath her touch. Where her feet grazed the soil, flowers awoke as if remembering they had once been stars. The air shimmered with the scent of beginnings, and even the wind paused, afraid to disturb her quiet grace. Yet behind that light, something ancient stirred. A rhythm beneath the earth, low, slow, and alive, as if the world itself had a heartbeat she could almost hear. She would stop sometimes and close her eyes, and in that stillness it called to her, a voice not of the sky, but of the dark beneath it, a hum too deep for mortals, too tender for gods. Her mother, Demeter, would smile at her radiance, but fear the silence that followed her laughter. For in that silence even the birds seemed to listen, as though waiting for a story that had not yet been told. And when she turned her face to the horizon, the light bent toward her, but the shadows reached too. That night the moon hung low, swollen and gold, its reflection trembling in the river like a warning. The whisper beneath the soil grew louder, not cruel, not cold, but sorrowful, a whisper that knew her name. And when she whispered back, just once, without knowing why, the earth shuddered, and far below, something began to wake. Dawn bled softly across the meadows, a golden sigh brushing through the fields Persephone had sown. The dew shimmered like the breath of sleeping stars, and the wind whispered secrets through the wheat, secrets meant for her alone. But that morning, something was different. The air trembled, not with fear, but with knowing. Even the river paused its song, as though the world itself waited for what was about to come. Persephone knelt to gather a bloom, a white narcissus glowing faintly as if lit from within. But as her fingers touched its petals, the ground beneath her trembled, a pulse of light, then shadow, as if the earth itself had taken a sudden breath. She looked up. Across the horizon, the sky had split, not torn by storm or fire, but by silence. And from that silence stepped a figure, black as twilight, tall as sorrow. His presence bent the sunlight into curves of gold and ash. The birds stilled, the air thickened, and time, gentle, eternal time, forgot to move. He did not speak. He simply was, like a memory the world had buried and then unearthed. And though she should have fled, some quiet part of her soul, the part that dreamed of other skies, stirred with recognition. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled, soft as wind through petals. The stranger's gaze lifted, and the world darkened behind his eyes. "Someone who has waited too long to be remembered." His voice was smoke and velvet, a sound that felt both forbidden and familiar. And as he spoke, the white flower in her hand turned crimson, as though it had drunk the color from her heart. "Your world is light, but even light needs its shadow to be whole." The wind rose around them, petals spiraling into a storm of gold and flame, and in that storm she saw him as he truly was, a god wrapped in grief, his crown woven from darkness and fire. "Hades," she whispered. At the sound of his name, the earth sighed, a deep, aching exhale that split the meadow open. Below her, she saw not death, but another world, glimmering with pale fire, rivers of glass, and the hum of voices that belonged to the forgotten. "Why do you call to me?" she asked, though she already knew. "Because," he said, and his gaze held hers, "because you are the only one who can hear the song beneath the earth." The sky dimmed, the petals stilled, and in that moment, between sunlight and shadow, the world changed forever.
The world held its breath. The sky dimmed until even the sun seemed afraid to shine, and the meadow where Persephone stood trembled like something alive. Her heart, that small, sacred flame, beat against her ribs like a bird that had never known its cage until now. The petals she had dropped were no longer white. They glowed faintly red, as though the earth itself bled through them. A soft hum rose beneath her feet, a sound older than gods, the heartbeat of the underworld awakening. She turned toward Hades and found no monster there, only a sorrow so vast it looked like night had taken human form. His eyes burned not with cruelty, but with centuries of silence. He reached out his hand, not command, not demand, but invitation. The world around her began to fracture into light. The air shimmered, the ground split open like a wound filled with stars. She gasped, yet there was no fear in it, only awe, as if she were standing at the edge of a dream too beautiful to be believed. Then the earth took her, softly, tenderly, like a mother reclaiming what it had once given away. Down she fell, through veils of golden dust, through rivers of molten glass, through whispers that spoke her name in forgotten tongues. The air grew cooler, then fragrant, not with flowers, but with memory. Each breath tasted of lost songs and quiet tears. When she landed, the ground beneath her feet was black crystal, reflecting 1,000 tiny flames that flickered like souls. Above her stretched a ceiling of shimmering stone, etched with constellations that never touched the sky. The air pulsed with life, not the life of the world above, but a stillness that hummed, gentle, eternal. And from the shadowed distance, Hades came forward, his presence folding the silence around him like a cloak. "Do not fear," he said softly. "You are not my prisoner. You are my echo, the part of light the darkness has always longed for."
Persephone's voice was a whisper. "Why me?" He looked at her, not as a god looks at a mortal, but as one endless thing looks upon another. "Because you are not afraid to listen." She turned, and before her stretched his kingdom, rivers that glowed like silver blood, gardens of glass where pale flowers bloomed beneath a sun that had never risen. Beauty, terrible and perfect. And in that beauty something stirred within her, a recognition, deep and wordless. She belonged here, and she did not know why. For the first time, she smiled, and the underworld, long forgotten by light, bloomed. The world held its breath, as if the air itself feared to move. Rivers, once silver threads of song, now dragged their sorrow through silent valleys, reflecting skies heavy with forgotten light. Fields that had danced in sunlight now shivered in stillness, their petals trembling like hearts in mourning. Villagers whispered with hushed fear. Children no longer ran with laughter. Their eyes sought the sky for a spark that had long abandoned them. Even the wind carried grief, curling through empty streets, weaving between shuttered windows, as if the world itself remembered joy and wept for its absence. Trees bent their branches in silent prayer, and the creatures of forest and field huddled beneath shadowed leaves, uncertain if life would ever remember its rhythm. Every heart carried a quiet ache, a longing that had no name, yet whispered of hope still unseen. And in that silence the world waited, for the bloom beyond the veil, for the daughter whose return would awaken light in shadow and teach the earth to breathe once more. Villagers whispered with hushed fear. Children no longer ran with laughter. Their eyes sought the sky for a spark that had long abandoned them. Mothers clutched their children and wept into the wind. Fathers knelt in the silent streets, their voices trembling as they called out, "Come, come to us, and save this world before it dies."
Silence stretched like silk. The air was alive, but softly, breathing in sighs of forgotten dreams. Persephone stood upon the obsidian plain, her reflection rippling faintly beneath her feet, as if even the darkness wished to remember her face. All around, the world glowed dimly, a twilight that never ended, neither night nor dawn, a hush between two eternities. And from that hush rose color, strange, slow, miraculous. Vines of silver wound up pillars carved from onyx. Flowers bloomed of glass and ash, their petals glimmering with imprisoned starlight. Each one opened at her passing, as though the underworld itself leaned closer to breathe her in. Hades watched from the distance, still, unblinking, his crown dimmed to quiet flame. He had built this realm as a refuge for the lost, a place where even grief could find shape and name. Yet now, with her among the shadows, he felt the long-dead ember stir again. She walked deeper, through corridors where the air hummed softly, through halls where whispers curled like smoke along the walls. Every step she took was music, the kind the living had forgotten how to hear. "What is this place?" she asked. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with wonder. "The Garden of Night," he answered, "the only place the dead can still remember what it means to dream." And she saw it then, rivers glowing with soft light, spirits walking as glimmers between the trees, each carrying a spark of the life they had once lived. No cries, no chains, no flames, only the quiet murmur of memory returning home. A small bird of shadow landed upon her hand. Its eyes were twin embers, its feathers soft as dusk. When it sang, the air shimmered, a melody so fragile it seemed the world might break to hear it. Persephone smiled, and the bird turned to light, vanishing into her palm. Hades watched, and the silence between them deepened. He had seen kingdoms rise and crumble, but never had he seen life bloom in death's own garden. "You bring spring where there should be none," he said softly. She turned toward him, her eyes bright as the last star before dawn. "Perhaps spring was never meant to stay above," she whispered. "Perhaps it was always waiting to return here." And at that moment the garden shifted, the roots stirred, the rivers brightened, the air filled with a soft trembling light. Something ancient broke its long sleep, and from the coldest stone came the scent of growing things. Hades stepped closer, not as a king, but as a man caught between awe and ache. For the first time, his voice faltered. "Persephone, you are not of this world, and yet you are its heart." The shadows moved around them, curling like smoke, whispering her name as though the realm itself adored her. And in that moment, something deeper than fate began to bloom. The air quivered, a low hum, like a secret trembling against silence, moved through the garden of night. The rivers dimmed to silver thread. The stars seemed to draw closer, listening. Persephone stood by the great obsidian table, upon which rested a single pomegranate, crimson as a heartbeat, glistening in the soft dark. Its scent was warm, wild, forbidden, the scent of something alive in a world long dead. She felt its call, faint but deep, like an echo that knew her name before she spoke it. Hades approached, slow as dusk. No crown, no shadowed command. Only the quiet reverence of a man who has found light in a place where no light should be. He said nothing, yet the silence between them was filled with 1,000 unspoken things. She turned to him. "What happens if I taste it?" He looked at her for a long time, eyes dark as the birth of night. "Then the world will change. Yours, mine, perhaps even the one above." Her fingers brushed the fruit, warmth, pulse, promise. He stepped closer. "You don't belong here," he whispered, "and yet, if you go, the silence will never heal again." Her breath caught. The pomegranate gleamed between them like a captured sun. And in its red glow she saw 2 worlds reflected, one of endless bloom, one of eternal dusk, both calling her, both needing her. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "Only once," he said, "and then forever." She smiled faintly, a tear of light in her eyes. "Then let it be forever." She broke the fruit. The sound was soft, yet the world trembled. Ruby seeds spilled into her hand, tiny drops of eternity. She took one, then another, and with each taste, the garden of night bloomed brighter. The rivers turned to gold. The roots sang beneath the earth. Even the spirits stopped their wandering, watching as spring began to breathe through shadow. Hades fell to one knee, not in worship, but in wordless wonder. For the first time, he saw what love truly was. Not power, not possession, but surrender. "Persephone," he whispered, "you have undone me." She touched his face, gentle as dawn touching the sea. "Then let us be undone together." And from that vow, the world above and below were forever bound by choice, by longing, by the taste of one crimson seed and the promise that love would bloom even in the deepest dark.
The world above began to wither, not with noise, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows after laughter dies. Petals curled upon themselves, rivers thinned to whispers. The song of the earth turned hollow. Demeter walked through empty fields, her feet stirring dust where wheat once swayed like sunlight. Her eyes were wide, lost, searching the horizon for a face that did not return. "Persephone," she called, once, twice, and even the sky seemed to flinch. The wind turned away, the sun dimmed its gaze. She wandered through temples and valleys, through forests where every leaf drooped like a mourning veil. And with every tear that touched the soil, the world shuddered. The breath of mortals grew short, their prayers rising like smoke that never found the gods. Far below, Persephone heard those prayers as faint music through stone, fragile, distant, like the echo of a childhood dream. She stood beside Hades, her eyes veiled with sorrow. "I hear her," she whispered. "She calls to me from the light." Hades turned toward her, his expression torn between love and fear. "If you go," he said softly, "then the silence will reclaim me." She looked upon him and saw not a king of death, but a man who had learned to love the impossible. "I belong to both," she said. "The seed has bound me, but my heart still breathes in her garden." A tremor moved through the underworld, a pulse deep and ancient. The torches flickered blue, the dead murmured in restless dreams. Above, Demeter raised her hands to the heavens. Her grief became thunder, her rage frost. "Give her back," she cried, "or let the world starve with me." And so it began, storms that tore through the harvest, rains that froze before they touched the ground. Mountains split, seas withdrew, even Olympus turned its gaze away. Zeus, weary of the ruin, sent word through shadows and wind. "Let the girl rise, if only for a time, lest creation itself forget how to breathe." The message reached the underworld as a whisper through the roots of the world. Persephone stood in the golden glow of the garden of night. Her hand brushed the last of the pomegranate seeds. "I must go," she said, her voice trembling, "for even love cannot live if life itself dies." Hades closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the stars dimmed. "Then take my darkness with you," he murmured, "so the light will not forget me." He touched her cheek, a farewell that burned like frost, and with that touch, the earth above began to stir. At first, there was nothing, only the faintest glimmer, like the memory of dawn on a forgotten sea. Then, a sigh through the soil, a whisper that wound its way through root and stone. The earth stirred, the frozen seeds began to hum, and far above, Demeter lifted her head, for she felt it. The heart of the earth stirred, beating once more with the breath of her returning child. Light, soft and trembling, split the dark horizon like a blade of mercy. The scent of rain filled the air, and where tears had once fallen, flowers began to rise, hesitant at first, then wild, untamed, joyous. Persephone was coming home. She rose through the cracks of worlds, her hair trailing starlight, her skin touched by the gold of two realms, one of shadow, one of flame. The ground kissed her feet with petals, and every color she had ever loved came rushing to greet her. Demeter ran, no goddess now, only a mother. Her cry broke the sky, and when their arms met, spring itself was born anew. "My child," she whispered, "you've returned to me." Persephone smiled, and in her eyes was both dawn and dusk. "Not returned, mother, but reborn." The meadows erupted in song. Birds flew from the hollows as if the world had been forgiven. Rivers laughed again, carrying blossoms on their backs. The mortals lifted their faces to the warmth and wept with relief they could not name. Yet, beneath that joy, a quiet shadow lingered, for deep within her hand, one last pomegranate seed still shimmered red, a memory, a promise, a bond unbroken. At twilight, when no one watched, she turned her face to the south, where the wind blew cold from the underworld. Her lips moved in silence, and though no sound escaped, Hades heard it, a whisper through the dark, "I will return." And far below, the king of shadows stood by the golden river, feeling the warmth she had left behind. He closed his eyes and smiled for the first time since the world began. Above, the last of the frost melted into dew. Spring danced barefoot through the meadows. The earth sang, and every year since, when the flowers bloom and fade again, the world remembers that love is not a season. It is the rhythm beneath them all.
There are loves that burn like fire, brief, bright, gone. And then there are loves that breathe like the earth, endless, patient, reborn with every heartbeat. The love of Persephone and Hades was both. Each spring she rose from the dark like a song rediscovered, bringing color to the bones of the world. Each autumn she descended again, carrying light into the hollows of death. The world called it a cycle, but for them it was a vow. When she walked through the meadows, her laughter filled the air like bells of sunlight. But when night fell, she would pause, her eyes drawn to the horizon's shadow, for she could feel him, his presence beneath the soil, the quiet ache of devotion that reached her like a heartbeat through stone. And in the underworld, Hades would raise his hand toward the ceiling of earth, his fingers tracing the faint warmth that bled through the cracks. Her warmth. Neither world was whole without the other, neither god complete without the other's shadow. The mortals sang of her as a goddess of bloom, but the poets whispered another truth, that she was not only the bringer of life, but the keeper of endings, that she had walked through death and returned carrying beauty that even darkness could not devour. At dusk one year, when the veil between realms thinned, she stood at the border, one foot in gold, the other in shadow. The air shimmered with longing, and there he was, Hades, waiting where light fades to night. No crown, no kingdom, only a man standing where love had once changed the world. "Must we always part?" he asked, his voice soft as falling ash. She smiled, the kind of smile that breaks the heart and heals it all at once. "We do not part, my love. We turn, like seasons." She took his hand. Their fingers met, light and dark entwined, and for a breathless moment, the worlds blurred. The fields above glowed with fireflies. The rivers below shimmered with dawn. Life and death held each other, and time forgot to move. Then she stepped back, half in spring, half in shadow, and whispered, "Wait for me." He bowed his head. Always. And when she vanished into light, the underworld sighed with peace. When she vanished into dark, the earth bloomed with grace. For they had rewritten the oldest truth, that love need not conquer or be conquered, it need only endure. And so, every spring is her return, every autumn his embrace, and every heartbeat of the world is the echo of two souls who chose to love in both life and death. The tale of Persephone and Hades was never one of abduction or despair. It was the story of balance, of courage, of finding beauty even in the deepest dark. Because somewhere beneath every seed and behind every shadow, the same truth blooms again. Love is the only thing that rises and never dies.
At last the daughter returned, and with her the first tremor of life stirred beneath the frozen soil. Light like molten gold spilled through the cracks of the sleeping world, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the bloom of spring to break the silence. The earth awoke as if remembering a forgotten dream. The frost withdrew like an old sorrow lifting its veil, and in the hush that followed, light began to move again, not in thunder nor in fire, but in the quiet pulse of living things. A single leaf trembled, a river sighed, and from the wounded soil the first violet of spring unfurled its heart. The world did not speak her name, yet it was her breath that stirred the dawn. Persephone, daughter of the dark, keeper of the bloom and the abyss, had mended the seam between life and death. She stood now at the edge of the two realms, half bathed in the sun's golden mercy, half wrapped in the twilight's gentle arms. In her eyes both the fire of creation and the ache of farewell. In her hands the fragile balance of all things, birth and decay, shadow and flame, love and the grave. Once she had been torn between worlds, now she was the bridge. The underworld still sang her name in echoes, but above every petal carried her hymn. Wherever a seed split the earth, she was there. Wherever light kissed shadow, she was there. And beside her, the mortal who had defied the impossible. His love had not conquered death, it had taught it to kneel. He was no longer merely human, he was the echo of her compassion, the living proof that even gods could be healed by love. Together, they walked through meadows reborn from ruin. Each step they took painted color where the world had gone gray. The rivers followed their whispers, the wind hummed their story to the trees. Children laughed again in the villages that once wept. The seasons turned not in dread, but in rhythm, a promise renewed, a circle made whole. No temple bore her statue, no crown adorned her brow, yet the world bowed to her still, in the soft return of rain, in the tremble of roots beneath the thaw, in the pulse that stirs within every living heart. And when night came, Persephone lifted her gaze to the heavens, and the stars, moved by her courage, began to bloom like pomegranates across the velvet dark. Her lover took her hand. No words passed between them, only a silence deep enough to carry eternity. And thus the world was mended, not by gods, nor kings, nor heroes, but a woman who chose love where others chose power, and by a man who saw eternity in her mortal tears. Their laughter carried the wind beyond the veil. The light held their story like a promise, and from that day on, every spring when the first flower breaks through the frost, the world remembers her, Persephone, the bloom beyond the veil, whose light returns with every dawn, whose name the stars still whisper to the dark.
Farmers sang as their crops swayed in golden gratitude. Elders smiled with quiet relief, their hearts unburdened at last. And children ran through fields of light, their laughter ringing like chimes in the wind. Even the seasons seemed to dance in harmony, turning not by chance, but in rhythm with the joy they had restored. And so, the tale of Persephone drifts into dusk, where light and shadow share one heartbeat. If ever you stand in a field at spring's first dawn and feel the air shimmer with something ancient, it is her, the girl who became a goddess, the goddess who chose to love. If ever the night feels less lonely, it is because somewhere beneath your feet a king still waits, not for power, but for the memory of her touch. For love is not a story that ends, but one that breathes through seasons, through lifetimes, through you. And if this tale whispered to your heart, if you felt the ache, the wonder of it, the music of it, then let your light join ours. Like the story, share its echo, and subscribe so that the next tale may find you, where shadow meets flame, and love remembers its name.